Hello and welcome to another episode of Damon's Tabletop Terrain. Now, in the last few weeks, I've started to put together a Imperial Guard army, and mainly been working on the troop section. And so I've been trying to separate my troops up into just looking a little bit more different. So I bought some heads from victoriaminiatures.com, which sell a really nice range of um, military army head types that fit quite nicely with the Games Workshop figures. So I can have some that look like Australian jungle fighters, or sort of the middle one here is like a grenadier kind of guard looking fellow, and then you've got the standard Cadian troop alongside him here. So what I wanted to I show you really is that I spent quite a lot of time going through videos on what paint schemes to use, what techniques, what contrast paints to use, or just base paints, just to get a feel of what would look best, what would work for me from what I had. And so I wanted to sort of um, save you guys some time by putting together um, a an episode here where I can sort of show what I thought were the best links to look at on YouTube to help you paint Imperial Guard troops, and then go through what I actually did to paint uh, my own troops here. So the first thing really that I go to and I use quite a lot is the painting app by Citadel. It's a really, really useful app. I don't usually have many apps on my phone or my iPad, but this is one that I use quite a lot. It's a free app. It's very useful. Um, you can paint by the color type that you're using. So if you're doing a red, you can type in red and it will give you some suggestions of what paints to use and how to highlight them. And so it's useful for that. But you can also um, look up the model that you want to paint, and the Games Workshop models, most of them are in the app and you can look them up and it will give you color schemes mainly based on their box art. So if you do a lot of painting of box art, it's very helpful. They also have some nice links through the app to the Warhammer.com painting site, where there's some very, very good painting tutorials by the very talented painters on their YouTube channel. And you can also keep track of paints that you have and ones that you need. Of course, they have to be Citadel paints, but it's a useful option. And you can also keep track of projects, and I believe you can share some of them on their site through this app. And so it's really helpful for getting you to select paints. Like I said, if you're especially painting your armies and want them to look like the box art from Games Workshop. So, for example, here I would type in cadian, and you've got a nice selection now, which I believe has just been updated very recently with a lot of the new astra militarum models. So I was happy to see that. And so you can click on the Cadian shock troops, and then you can get some images, and it will tell you where, you can click on various colors, and it will show you where they're placed on the model. And then you can decide if you want to go with classic sort of base layer paints initially, and it will give you suggestions for priming as well as base coating and then highlighting. But you can also look at the contrast options, so it will give you a list of contrast paints if you like using the contrast paint range. And you can sort of look at this and also get an idea of, well, you can mix and use both types of paint, of course. So I also looked on YouTube for some good painting Cadian troop tutorials, and there are some very good ones. The Warhammer site, obviously, there's a good link here. Sonic Sledgehammer Studio also does an excellent tutorial. The Apathetic Fish Miniatures also does a very good tutorial. And Tabletop Ready as well. There's some very nice a tutorial on the troops in particular, some very nice edge highlighting there, but he also goes into detail on different skin types and colorations. So that's also very useful if you want your troops to look like they have different skin tones from different countries or different areas, that kind of thing. So how did I paint my guard troops at the end of the day? So the priming, a lot of the videos like to use Wraithbone spray as a primer. I don't use that or haven't used it, but I'm really thinking about using it from now on. Um, uh, I've been using Rust-Oleum primers on most of my terrain and models and haven't really had an issue with it. On some of the models, some of the smaller models I've painted recently, sometimes I get a little bit of an issue with getting paints to attach one coat to the primer. So that could be maybe because I primed the models at a certain temperature that it didn't quite um, dry enough correctly or at the right temperature setting, maybe, I don't know. But in general, the primer is excellent and it's a cheaper option to use. But I'm definitely thinking about using the Wraithbone in the future. So I usually start off by painting the skin, the head or the hands of my models before I start painting other areas. In this case, I was using the Guilliman Flesh contrast paint from Citadel, and I also have some army painter shades. There's a soft tone, there's a medium tone, there's a dark tone. I quite like those for shading, although I would initially just put down the Guilliman Flesh first and then paint the rest of the base layers and do the shading later. For the khaki pants, I really like the Aragus Dunes contrast paint for doing khaki. It flows really nicely. The coloration's very good. I usually do 2 coats. You can probably get away with 1. The green armor and the gun casing, in this case, I use the Creed Camo contrast paint. It definitely needs 2 coats. Just 1 coat onto even the shoulder pads doesn't look that great. You need 2 coats. For the black on the boots, I use the contrast black Templar, and again I use 2 coats there. The leather pouches, one of my favorite contrast paints is Snakebite Leather. I think this gives a lovely effect. It's a really nice contrast paint. It's definitely one of the better contrast paints, in my opinion. It gives a very good leathery effect, as you can see here. I did it on his blade casing there. And for the belt and the edge of the base itself, I prefer to use the base black, Abaddon black, instead of the contrast paint. Sometimes when you've got finer things that you're trying to paint, like the belt, it's easier to use a thicker base paint than the contrast paint because it flows a little bit more readily than the base paint. So you may end up making a bit of a mess and overlapping into areas that you've already done, and it can run a little bit and mix with, say, your khaki here. So I prefer to use the Abaddon black for the belt. For the metal parts, you can also use a contrast paint, the Basiculum Grey, I think it's called, and that's okay. I prefer to use the Lead Belcher on my metal parts and the spike and also his water bottle here. For grenades and things like that can be attached on the belt, I went with a darker green. This is a contrast militarum green, which 2 coats of that gives a nice dark green grenade kind of looking feel to it. The gold areas, I really like Retributor armor. It's definitely one of the better um, metallic paints that Citadel does. In terms of the gold, I think it's the better one that they do. It seems to mix really well, and it goes on very easily. One coat is all you need. So I usually do that for the anything that's gold emblems or braiding or anything like that gets the Retributor armor. For the eye lenses, I dabbed a little bit of layer paint, Stormhost Silver, which is a very bright silvery metallic paint, and use that as a base for the eye lenses, which once that's dry, you then coat with a technical Spirit Stone Red. And this is usually used for things like jewels and lenses for other models, but it gives that nice tint to that to the lens. It gives a very good effect. In terms of the heated guns, like these sort of plasma guns, you can give it kind of a quick sort of dry brush with gold or bronze paint, and then just give it a very thin coat of Caribou Crimson over the edge. And if you wanted to give it like another color, like a blue, you could do Drukari Violet, I think it is. And so it just gives that kind of this metal's been heated kind of feel to it. The white wings and emblems on the chest plate, I was using another contrast paint, Apothecary White, which gives a nice kind of grey-white coloration there. And for the hair and the sort of wooden gun stock kind of look I was going for, I used the contrast gore grunter fur, another one that flows quite nicely, gives a nice brown effect. Now the washes. For the jungle sort of army troops, I wanted something a little bit lighter. I didn't want to just cover it in Agrax Earthshade, so I went with a 1-to-1 mix of Agrax Earthshade and the Larman Medium. And that gives you a sort of a not too intense wash. For the general troops seen below here, I wanted something a bit more darker and grungier, like they've been in the trenches and they're kind of rain-soaked and mud-soaked. So I went with 100% Agrax wash, and just was careful not to let it pool too much on creases, otherwise it can be very, very dark as a shade. So if you do see it pool or build up in certain areas, especially on longer coats in the folds, just take your brush and just sort of soak up those excess blotches of the stain. So you can do if final highlights if you really want to take it to a really nice high quality level. A lot of the videos and myself use a lighter sort of skin tone. This Kislev flesh is quite nice, and you can add that to the nose and the above the eyes, and anywhere where you think light is going to hit the face and more prominent features. For the black areas, some people use a little highlight of Eshin grey where they think light is needed to be reflected off. The green armor and the gun casing, I use a very, very fine edge highlight of Strachan green. The khaki pants, Shapti bone. I actually kind of use a small dry brush. I prefer to flick my highlights rather than do edges on to pants. For the metal, and the gold areas, I just give very delicate little touches of the Stormhost silver, and that gives you like that nice glint, like you would get from a gold or a metallic structure. And the leather pouches, if I felt they needed it, they could have a little edge highlight of Zandri dust as well. But usually with the leather pouches, that contrast paint is so good that you don't really need it in most cases. Now, for the basing, I used Vallejo's earth texture, and they do various types. They do kind of a grey, gritty one. This is a muddy kind of version that I used. And these 200 ml containers, they're about $10, I think this was, off of Amazon, and it lasts forever. You can do a lot of bases with this, and so you can apply it and paste it on to your base, and you can make some little ridges and muddy patterns on it. and then give it a wash with Agrax Earthshade or maybe a mix with Nuln Oil. And then once that's dry, just give it a quick dry brushing with a Shapti bone or some kind of lighter brown just to bring out those little ridges on your bases. And then you can add a tuft. I think these are army painter tufts. And then usually I usually finish with adding decals, and decals can really make your models pop, and just give them that extra bit of just finesse and detail if you apply them correctly. So I've been using micro scales products for the last few years, and so you get two bottles. These are about $4 each. So the micro set you apply to the surface of what you want to apply the decal to. Then you carefully place your decal onto this area, and then you brush the micro set on top of the decal, and that basically softens that decal, and so it will stick nicely to a curved surface. If you just apply it wet, sometimes those decals will want to peel off, and you can see the edges, and they just don't look very good. And so this kind of helps really get some nice, smooth, really great looking decals. And then if you want to remove those decals, you can just put on some more microset to just soften it and remove it. But once you've applied your decal, of course, it's going to be pretty vibrant and clear over that weathered trooper that you've just painted. So what I tend to do is take some pastels and just take a razor blade and just scrape some fine pastel dust into a little container and just dust some on with a brush over the top, so it's got a little bit of grime and weathering over the top of it, and that usually gives a pretty good effect. So thank you once again for watching. I'm going to do some more paint scheme videos and links to more sort of useful information and other videos for helping to paint certain squads and other army components in the future. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. So thanks again, and see you soon.